Assalamu alaikum and good evening. On behalf of Lands Politics, Defend Our Democracy, Radio Islam, the local branch of the Jamiatul Ulama, South Africa, as well as the Nurul Islam Center, where we are based, and Eastwave Radio, we would like to welcome all the attendees here this evening and all those listening to this program on Radio Islam and on Eastwave. I think if we were to describe the current sentiment of the nation, we would find that South Africans are disillusioned, they are worried, they are frustrated, they are angry, they are confused. Many South Africans feel betrayed that almost 30 years after democracy, they argue this is not what we envisaged our country will look like. This is not what the liberation struggle was about. Very loyal members of political parties have made a very tough decision to distance themselves from those political parties. That's the extent of the frustration, the anger, the disillusionment. The ruling party, the ANC, goes to its elective conference in about 2 months' time. There isn't much hope on the horizon if you look at how the dynamics are playing out currently as compared to NASRAC and conferences prior to that, when it comes to factionalism, when it comes to division, when it comes to candidates who have a major cloud hanging over their heads, standing for high office. When we talk about the opposition political parties, many would agree that they are scoring own goals. We see what's happening with the coalitions. They cannot manage their differences. Coalitions are falling apart. And they've been struggling with this since 2016. So, as ordinary South Africans, as citizens of this beautiful country, we are in a very precarious situation, to say the least. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know where to place our hope. We don't know how to read the current political situation and how to read the situation going forward. We don't know how to evaluate our options. What are our options and how do we evaluate them? But, as I've been saying constantly whenever we have such gatherings and such meetings, that anger, disillusionment, frustration, uncertainty, confusion, that cannot lead to us giving up hope. It cannot lead to us becoming passive. It cannot lead to us giving up making an attempt. It's our future. It's the future of our children, our progeny, our communities. We've invested in this country. We owe it to ourselves more than anyone else. It's not fair that we are in the position that we are in, but it is what it is. So we've got to pick ourselves up and we've got to make the best effort that we can. And in order to be able to do that, to know what role can we play individually, what role can we play collectively, what role can we play as communities, what role can we play as civil societies, we have to understand the landscape. We have to understand what's happening. We must be able to project with some degree of authenticity in terms of what is likely to happen in the coming elections and the elections after that. We shouldn't allow this anger and this frustration and this disillusionment to cripple us, to make us give up, to make us become totally disillusioned, where we stop then investing in this country or trying to reform it or forcing the change that needs to happen. And that's why we've gathered here this evening. We want to listen to experts. We want to listen to those who have experience on critical issues so that we can be more educated, informed, enlightened, so we understand the landscape better. That is the starting point. You've got to understand what's happening, what's likely to happen, how it's happening, why it's happening, in order to be able to then plan in terms of individually, collectively, as communities, as civil society, how do we approach the political future of this country. That said, we've got the program lineup as follows. Ibrahim Fakir will be addressing us for 10 minutes on the electoral future of the ANC. Ismail Vadi will be addressing us on World Coalition's work, also for 10 minutes. Nishan Bolton will talk about new politics, new choices. And Zakira Vadi will talk about independence and electoral reform. So all our speakers will speak for 10 minutes each, after which we will open up the floor and hear your thoughts and take your comments, and hopefully our panelists will be able to answer your questions. So first up, we'll call Ibrahim Fakir. He's a well-known political analyst. He's respected. across the board for his political insight and his political analysis. He's also the head of programs at ASRI, amongst many other caps that he wears. But for the sake of brevity, I'll restrict myself to those two. I think we're very fortunate that he's given us of his valuable time. He's come straight from the airport to talk to us this evening.
Sorry, as you can see, I'm quite disoriented. I never know which chair to go to. But with that, thanks very much for this very kind invitation. Assalamu alaikum and good evening to everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. The question was framed was, what is the electoral future of the ANC? Well, there are two assumptions being made here. The first is that there is an election in the future. And Zakir Havati might speak to why we might think that in 2024, it is possible that we might either have a delayed election or no election at all. But that's not the main focus of what I'm going to talk about. The second assumption is that the ANC has an electoral future. And the debate is open as to whether that is in fact true or not. And thirdly, one has to ask which ANC, because there are several different ANCs running around at the moment. Some people might say historically there were always a few different ANCs, but at least there was some degree of cohesion and a fidelity to a certain core set of principles that melded people in the ANC and the broader alliance together. But these days, that's not necessarily true. You can realistically speak about 3 or 4 or 5 different ANCs even. You can take any single policy issue, whether it be land reform, whether it be the electoral system, whether you need a basic income grant, whether you need climate change policy, what your energy policy should be, what the energy mix would be, and take any random issue, you would have 4 or 5 diametrically opposed visions which emerge from the very same party. So that's its first crisis. But this crisis is not a crisis of the ANC alone. It's a general crisis of politics and of political parties generally. In the introduction, the moderator has spoken about the decline of levels of trust and so on. And let me just give you 2 indicators from very reliable, methodologically sound public opinion surveys which have been done by, amongst others, the Human Sciences Research Council and the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. The first is that there is a general decline of trust in all public institutions across the board, including, importantly, the Constitutional Court and the Electoral Commission, both of whom used to enjoy very high levels of trust. The second important marker to note is that the media, of all people, of all things, are trusted more than politicians and even more than business people. And thirdly, that political parties enjoy the lowest levels of trust of any organized institution or organization in society. If you take a governing party, people express high levels of trust or confidence less than a quarter. That's less than 25%. If you take opposition parties, it drips slightly lower to about 23%. So it's a generalized crisis across all political parties and across the idea of what politics itself is. This means that it has introduced a legitimation crisis for all political parties and a credibility crisis for government. Now, when you have the coexistence of a political crisis with a credibility crisis with a legitimacy crisis, and they coexist, the incentive for people to take an active interest in politics is low, and hence the third major feature we can pick up in the political context is that voter turnout in elections and political participation is declining. That's not to say that people are apathetic, that people don't care. I mean, the fact that many of you turned out here is quite pleasing. It means you are interested. And across the country, many people are interested. They're not apathetic, but they've lost trust. So their lack of participation is not because of apathy or antipathy. It is about a lack of trust and confidence in the system and of the key players in the system. So let's return so just to paint a generalized picture, to return to the question of the electoral future of the ANC. You know, you can look at many public opinion surveys, and my view is that when you look at public opinion surveys which are emergent from the commercial marketing agencies and pollsters, it's safe to disregard them. This is in distinction from the opinion surveys I was talking about, conducted by credible social science institutions. But we have a more methodologically robust set of indicators. That is the trajectory of the performance of the ANC over the last 5 or 6 elections. And here's the trajectory, if you want to think about what the electoral future of the ANC is. In 2004, the ANC had 69%, that is 70% of electoral support. And the level of voter turnout was in fact quite high. It was in the 70%. But the reason I use 2004 is not a random election that I chose, because, you know, there's 1994 and there's 1999 before. But 2004 is where the real turning point starts. So in 2004, voter turnout is high, the level of support that the ANC has is high, and in the National Parliament, the ANC has 279 seats, which is a very big or large majority. Come the next national election in 2009, you will note that the aggregate support of the ANC drops from 69% or close to 70% to 65%. And the number of seats that they lose in 2009 is 15. So they lose 15 seats in Parliament. Now, in terms of the percentages, it doesn't sound like a lot, but if you take the number of seats, it's quite a lot. The number of the margin of majority has dropped very significantly. In the next election, in 2014, it goes down even further to 62% in 2014. And they lose a further 15 seats. And come the election in 2019, it gets even worse, and they drop down from 62% to 57%. So you can see that there's a cumulative and compounded. That means every election they lose something, and they lose further on that election in the next election. So it literally would appear that if you take this trajectory, forget the contextual features of the lack of trust and the lack of confidence and so on, just on the basis of what I've painted now, the number on average is a loss of 4.5% in every election, which means that the ANC will settle down at 52 or 51%. Now, there's a caveat here, and that caveat is that there might be a new electoral system. And so the ANC might keep its majority by a slim margin here, or, depending on the new system which they will adopt or will choose to adopt, an undesirable one, in my view, they will have proxies standing as independent candidates, and once they enter into a representative institution, they will then vote with the ANC as a voting bloc. The second is that they will use independents as proxies because there is no regulation of independent candidates yet with regard to financing. So they may use independent candidates to loop back money. Now, why am I giving you this picture when I started off talking about trust? And that is because these features are suggesting to us that there is a greater level of mistrust which is going to take root not just in politics and political parties generally, but in the ANC in particular. And the nature of decisions which have been made by President Ramaphosa over the last 5 years, who apparently was the hope about renewal and revitalization of the ANC, has seen a major amount of reversal. So it is not just us talking out of our thumbs. There's clear data and data points which are showing what the trajectory of decline has been over the last decade. Let me just give you and leave you with one last thought. You know, I started off talking about the decline of trust, right? And I said that the level of trust in the governing party, the ANC, is at 25%. It started off in 2006 at a high of 65%, which means that it has dropped by 40 it's a large set of percentages that it's dropped by. The opposition didn't drop as fast or as dramatically. They started off a low base, but their decline was only a matter of a few percentage points. So they started off at 30% confidence, and they dropped very low. Now, if you look at the comparison in the drop in percentages of how citizens are viewing these guys who are active in our politics, it's clear that those who don't trust the ANC anymore are not yet prepared to give their vote to another political party. That's the only saving grace that the ANC has on the basis of the numbers that we have. But it does mean that the credibility and legitimacy crisis will sharpen, because even though people are not prepared to give their vote to another party, a greater number of them will continue to stay away. And that stay away means that the ability to extract a level of accountability and responsiveness from elected politicians will become low, and then a greater amount of predatory interests start to take root, not that they haven't already. Criminal gangs and criminal violence start to animate the political sphere, not that that hasn't happened already. And so the claimants of predatory politics in cahoots with criminal gangs are those people who will now be ruling the roost of our politics, rather than legitimately elected political parties. And so one last thought, one final thought, is that if the trajectory of decline that I showed you is not enough to convince you, then look at the lie of the land in local government. Since 2016 and over 2021, the ANC lost control over 6 of the metros around the country. Those metros are the drivers of growth, of redistribution. And anyone who, like me, is on the left of center, even though I might be sitting in the middle, is wanting a greater amount of redistributionary impetus in policy. But if you have lost control and influence over those people in the metros, because those are the drivers of growth and redistribution, your ability to influence society is much, much lower. So now the ANC has not only lost power and authority, but has also lost influence in those areas of people who can drive growth and redistribution. The next speaker is going to talk about coalitions. I don't think it will work, but that's just me. Thanks very much.
No, Jazakallah, Ibrahim, for that. Jazakumullah. Most insightful, and we'll have an opportunity a little later to engage Ibrahim on some of those thoughts. We now call upon Ismail Vadi to talk about whether coalitions will work. I don't know how to introduce him. Is he now a retired politician? Is there such a thing? Or is he more of an author? But whatever, we understand his experience and we look forward to his thoughts.
Jazakallah wa assalamu alaikum, and good evening to everybody. I think Ibrahim has set a fantastic context for us about where things are heading towards from a political point of view in this country. And he ended off on a note that really feeds into my discussion topic. And that is, will coalitions work in this country? What have been their experiences? So, at least at the municipal level since 2016, we have now in selected cases of coalition governments. So at least the major metros here in Gauteng, PE is an example, 1 or 2 other municipalities. And this is likely to become the feature of the political landscape over the next 10, 15 to 20 years. So I'm predicting that the syndrome of a dominant ruling party might no longer be part of our political landscape, but what is likely to replace it is some form of coalition government. If the ANC doesn't make 50% in 2024, it will either be forced into a coalition with one party, and if it can't muster the coalition, then the opposition parties will be given the task of forming the coalition. And if they can't, then we have a hung parliament. So that's really where we are in terms of the 2024 scenario. Now, is this a good thing for our democracy, and will these coalitions actually work? If you look at the last 4 or 5 years at municipal level, these coalition governments are fragile, they're unstable, and they're proving to be unworkable. Okay? Most of them have collapsed within a year or two. So we had elections last year, municipal elections on the 5th of November. We haven't even reached the 5th of November this year, and the coalition in Johannesburg has collapsed. The coalition in what is Old Port Elizabeth has collapsed, and we are led to believe maybe in Ekurhuleni or Tshwane over the next few weeks, there might be a collapse of those coalitions also. Just today, the former mayor of Johannesburg had lodged an application in court to try and set aside the appointment of the new mayor of the city of Johannesburg. So what we're seeing here is really a set of unstable governance, incoherence in terms of policy implementation and getting services to people, etc. Now, what are the underlying problems here? Why are these coalitions not working? Because when you win an election or when parties form a coalition, they all agree to come together. But this marriage just breaks up within a short period of time. And I think our problems are the following. We have no experience of coalition governments, at least in the democratic period. Many of these negotiations are shrouded in secrecy. So parties are meeting behind closed doors. They are cutting deals for themselves. Okay, there's no transparency in the process. And in fact, I don't think there's a single coalition agreement that has been made public by any political party. So we don't know what the terms of the agreements are, okay, anywhere in the country. What we are left to believe, as public, ordinary people out there, is that these coalitions are only about political elites trading positions for themselves. It's really trade-offs. Who will get which portfolio? Who will be the MMC? Who's going to be the new mayor? Actually, the public interest is nowhere to be found. If you really look at these negotiations and discussions, there's no sense about how we're going to improve services for ordinary citizens there, for voters out there, and what impact will we have? How can we get better governance? And I think the problems on both sides, whether it is the ANC-led coalition or a DA-led coalition, this will apply to all of them. The net result is that these coalitions have not proven to be in the public interest. They're actually about personalities and the positions of personalities. Now, if the reality that has been painted by Ibrahim, if we say we are entering an era of coalition politics of some sort over the next decade, one of the tasks we have as a democracy, as citizens, is to ensure that these coalitions, whichever way they go, are actually durable, that they last the 5-year term. Otherwise, you have coalitions collapsing, new leaders come in, civil servants, public servants don't know which way to go because every now and then there's a new government that takes over. Okay? So, if you want to make these coalitions durable, I think the first thing is to make sure that the negotiations are not secret, are transparent, that the agreements are publicized openly so that people know what the agreements are. It is better if we can get agreements before elections, so that if I'm voting for Party A, I know Party A has actually entered into an agreement with parties B, C, and D, and this is what they stand for. So we've had a situation where sometimes in eThekwini, in Durban, for example, people voted for independent candidates only to find that some of them voted for the ANC mayor. Now they're being accused that, you guys are proxy votes that Fakir is talking about. Okay. So if we can get openness and transparency, Third thing about these coalition agreements, they must be based on clear-cut political principles, whatever the principles are of the coalition partners. But the public needs to know what is this coalition standing for and what is its program of activities. What will it deliver to the voters, to the citizens out there if the coalition is brought into power? And I think till now, the last 4 or 5 years, you see a coalition, you actually don't know what they stand for and what they're going to deliver to the public. If I were to lead a coalition, and I'm not going to enter politics again, at least official politics, but I mean, you know what, it is not difficult to hammer out a basic program, and you can put the details in afterwards. But what South Africans are yearning for is economic growth and job creation, number one. Number two, we want to resolve the energy crisis. Number three, we need water security and decent water in villages, in townships. There are so many municipalities now, they don't have water supply, right? So, I mean, these are basic things. There's the issue of poverty, hunger in our society, food insecurity. We've got so many grants. Can we review the social packages and say, okay, we're scrapping these, but we're giving a basic income grant to everybody who deserves it in the country. One grant has certainty about it, okay, so that people have a safety net. There's the issue of the rule of law and fighting crime. Just now I received some messages that somebody else has been kidnapped in the Eastern Cape. Okay, rule of law. There's no sense of authority and order in the society anymore. People can do what they want to do. All the complaints we have about the taxis here and this project that is undertaken, it's about just the sense of lawlessness in the society. From the petty criminal to the organized syndicates, right? From the corrupt looters to others who don't care a damn about the rest of society. So rule of law and fighting crime. We don't have an effective crime fighting strategy in this country. We don't have an effective non-partisan intelligence service. No government can successfully govern without a high-quality intelligence services which forewarns it of problems that are coming ahead of time. Clean governance and tackling corruption. Standard. Right? But we don't see any coalition parties really committing. They say many things before the election in their manifestos. But in real terms, tackling corruption and getting clean governance, we're not too sure where we are. There's this big elephant in the room, is the public service, the civil servants. Right? There are literally 2 to 3 million people employed by different levels of government. Under COVID, most of them stayed at home. There isn't a work culture within the bureaucracy anymore. Can we get an end to cadre deployment as a basis for a platform? Let's get back to merit performance in the public service and professionalize the public service. Zakira will talk about the issue of accountability of our MPs, MPLs, and councillors. If I were to ask just any of you later on, who's your MP for Lens? There's an ANC constituency office here. Who's the MP that's deployed here? When did you meet him or her? When did they have an event in this community or a public meeting in this community? I can tell you the answer is no. And that will be true for many other political parties also. So accountability of the public representatives. And then the issue of just stability in governance. Can we see coalitions see the 5 years through rather than collapsing in the first year or the second year? And there must be respect for the constitutional order. But I'm giving you 10 points for a platform for sensible governance and getting our society back on track. And then we can put down the details. So what needs to be done? Because that's really been, and we mustn't think that as citizens we are powerless. We can exercise significant weight through civil society organizations, through the media, through public demonstrations, etc. There must be legal and electoral reform in this country. We need to recognize and institutionalize in law how coalition governments will work in this society. We can't leave it to the whims and fancies of political leaders trading power and positions for themselves. So the coalition agreements must become legally enforceable and binding so that we know what is the contract that they are entering into on behalf of the public. What should political parties do? The time has come for political parties to put the people and the country first. It's as simple as that. Otherwise, they are not going to regain this public trust, this declining trust that Ibrahim is talking about. They will not win back public support and public trust in political parties. The time has come for us as ordinary voters, as citizens, to make sure that political opportunists, looters, hustlers, thugs, and simply political clowns don't get into political office, into positions of power. The people of this country have struggled for democracy, have made huge sacrifices for this democracy. They deserve a change in our political culture, and they deserve from our leaders, from the highest ranking to the lowest in government, they deserve respect for the democratic legal order in our country.
Shukran, Ismail. Pertinent points indeed. The next speaker is Nishan Bolton from the Katrada Foundation, and he'll be talking about new politics, new choices.
No, thank you and greetings to everybody. I'm not here on behalf of the Katrada Foundation because what I have to say might very well make Uncle Kathy turn in his grave. So I'm not here on behalf of the foundation. I'm here in my individual capacity. We've become accustomed in the last 30 years to the notion that politics is something dirty that we must avoid. And for a long while, we all bought into this, and many still do. But who benefits from that kind of thinking? It's the politicians themselves. Because at the end of the day, politics today is about your electricity, it's about water, it's the price of petrol, security, it's unemployment, it's car prices. There is nothing, I did a thing with my staff from the time that they woke up to the time that they went to bed, listing down each and every activity. And it was very difficult to find a single activity that was not impacted on by politics in some way or the other. Even the toothpaste that you use has a political price to it. Somebody has determined the price. Somebody's determined the kinds of ingredients that would be certified in order for you to use it. The amount of fluoride and whatever else in there. And I think we've become accustomed to the idea that politics is dirty and therefore we must stay away from it. And in essence, therefore, the best in society have stayed away from political office. Today, our political choices on issues and who our representatives are is literally a matter of life and death. The choices we've made has got us into a situation now where you can't travel the freeways of this country at night. You're uncertain. But the people who have the authority and the power to deal with this problem don't care. They just don't care. So that was the first point I want to make. I think, secondly, politics is about choices. Now, I left the ANC in 2009. The minute Zuma became president, I could not be associated with it. I didn't do that publicly. I didn't inform many other people. I just let my membership lapse. But I was the first organizer for the ANC in this area. I managed its provincial elections in 1995, in 1999, 2004. which was when it got, well, Ibrahim has given you the statistics. But when Zuma became president, I decided that it was wrong on so many levels. It was a betrayal of the highest order. Ismail and others could not accept that decision because they felt it was important to stay in there and try and fix it up. I had no basis to argue against them, but merely wanted my own wishes to be respected. Breaking from that kind of historical association is hard, but it has allowed me to begin to evaluate political options outside of viewing it just from a historical association with a particular political party. So I've been able to vote across party lines on the basis of who I thought was best able to do a particular job. So I'm not wedded to the kind of ideological positions. Is this party pro-capitalist? Is it pro-communist? What's the ethics of its leader? What's the track record of delivery? What's their community standing? What's their response to accountability? Are they open to those kinds of things? So today I think we have a situation where many people say, well, who must we vote for? It's the wrong question. The question should be, who is worthy of your support? And when you turn the question around, you begin to start looking for different answers. So it's no longer, no party must assume that they have a right to your vote. You need to make parties work for your vote. You need to decide what is it that you want for the country and for yourself, and who best then qualifies for that sacred vote that you will cast. Who comes closest to your views on the key issues of the day? And who has the best plans to address them? Who has the better ethics? Who has the integrity and the skills to do the job? And today, I suppose, who has a less record of corruption? Sometimes you hope that you can get somebody who's completely corrupt-free. But that might be a bit too difficult. But who has not stolen the whole bakery? Who's just taken one roll, you know? Democracy requires, however, more than voting. If anything, we have been lazy citizens in this country. We vote, and then we leave it. We vote for Imran, we vote for Zarina, whoever it is. We used to vote for Ismail. And then we leave it. What they do in those institutions, we don't know. Why our councillors would support tariffs in a particular budget, we don't know. Why they support particular positions, we don't know. We don't call them to account. Why members of parliament would vote for particular bills, we don't know. Because we don't think it's our business to come and ask them to account. And you know why? Because even if you ask them to account, they can tell you that they don't have to. They account to their political parties and not to you. And that's why the need to change the system is what's coming through. A new politics is required, beyond ideology, beyond historical choices. And our choices needs to be who can do what is required at this point in time to move us from A to B. In Kerala, they would kick out the communists every 5 years because they've not done a good enough job, and then Congress used to come in. So nobody was guaranteed that you're going to be automatically coming back to power. You have to contest for it. You have to win that support. But that requires citizens who are not slaves to history. But it requires also that we begin to look at how do we become active beyond tweeting, beyond on our chat groups. What is it that you do? Now, there are simple things. If you drive around Lens, the street lights are out all over. And this goes across everywhere else. But every street has a chat group. That street has no idea who is the council employee getting paid a salary every month to make sure that those street lights work. Now, if we start off on that, you use the power of that street to find that official, get him or her and come and explain what is happening here. Why are you getting a salary when this thing is not being done? And if we do that kind of work for almost every service, you change how public servants treat you. But you also hold the public representatives accountable for the failure of streetlights not working in your area. And that goes for a whole range of things. There are tools being developed which allows you to monitor services today electronically. OUTA and other institutions are developing these monitoring tools, and I think places like Lens and others are going to have to start using them. Because then you are able to evaluate how this municipality, how this province works in this area and focus it. This kind of work is happening in informal settlements, in Gauteng, in the Western Cape. Every 2 weeks, there's a report that comes out that says, in the informal settlements, water, toilets, this, and the other, this is the level of service. And municipalities are now getting embarrassed when they get low ratings. And suddenly, they are now jacking up. That's the first one. I mean, others have ignored you. I'm going to try and ignore you also. 2024. There will be new political formations. I don't take the view that coalitions have necessarily failed. I think it's too early to tell. But whether they fail or not, we need to think about how we and who we give our votes to, beyond what our history has taught us to do. Ashley Forbes writes today in the Daily Maverick. He says, communities and social formations from across the length and breadth of our nation should galvanize their collective efforts to create a new political party that will serve the interests of all South Africans, especially the vulnerable, the marginalized, and the poor. We should prepare and actively groom a new layer of leaders drawn from our communities who understand the lived experiences of the poor and who will fight with honesty and integrity for their interests. He goes on to say we can no longer tolerate mediocrity and must seek out the best talented, creative, competent, hardworking, and committed individuals to lead our nation with the highest standards of integrity, transparency, and accountability. He concludes with this, in the words of Mark Twain, politicians and diapers must be changed often and for the same reason. Thanks.
Thank you, Shan. Much food for thought. We now call upon Zakira Vadi to address us on the issue of independent candidates and electoral reform.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. So tomorrow, our parliamentarians will be voting on a bill. It's called the Electoral Amendment Bill. But I'm not sure if many of the members of parliament have actually read this bill or understand what it means. Earlier today, after almost 2 to 3 months of reading about this bill and getting an understanding, I still had to contact people who have been doing legal work to find out if I'm on the right track in understanding it. That's how complex this bill is. And we say this because when politicians will be voting on this tomorrow, in the words of Vali Musa, who spoke about this a few days ago, they'll be tinkering with the very lifeblood of our democracy. And that's your right to vote and how that vote is counted. So the history of this goes back to our electoral system that was formed in light of 1994. It was a very hasty period in terms of pulling together the elections, and the system was designed for a short amount of time. It was meant to run up until 1999 for national and provincial government elections. Parliament had the responsibility to change this voting system. And there's a quotation by Mandela in his last speech before Parliament in 1999 where he makes this point and says, it's important for our electoral system to change so that parliamentarians are more accountable to the people who elect them into power. And almost for the last 20 years, government has put together various commissions, report after report, on how to change the electoral system. But they've never ever implemented anything. And we're told very often that government listens to civil society, we are a government that listens to the people. But for the last 20 years on this issue, government hasn't listened. And still, tomorrow, it's very unlikely that politicians will listen, irrespective of what civil society organizations will be telling them. 2 years ago, there was a court case by a civil society organization called the New Nation Movement that forced government to listen. And government was compelled to put in place a voting system at the national and provincial government level that allowed independent candidates to stand. So our voting system currently allows for political parties to stand at the national and provincial level. It's only at a local government level that if you are an independent candidate, that you can stand for elections and become a public representative. And after the court ruled on this, Parliament was tasked to put together some sort of policy in place to allow the system to unfold in line with the 2024 elections. And the Minister of Home Affairs, Aaron Motsoaledi, called on Vali Musa and a team of other experts to look at electoral reform systems in different parts of the world. And this grouping pulled together two options for Parliament to consider. One is a minimalist option, which looks at the way our current systems run at the provincial level and at the national level, and try to almost insert independent candidates into that system. And the other option proposes something very much like local government elections, where you have a PR ballot where you can vote for a political party, and then you have a second ballot paper where there are faces of people there. So you can be an independent candidate, your face will be there. There'll be a candidate from a political party, their face will be there, and you're voting for the person rather than for the party. This was the majority option, but once again, Parliament and the Portfolio Committee dealing with this went with the minority option. Why? Because the minority option favors political parties more than favoring the public or favoring independent candidates. We've pulled together a set of points on why this bill is unfair. So tomorrow, the bill that will likely be passed will require independent candidates before elections to get 8,000 signatures with ID numbers, and political parties are only required to get 1,000 signatures before an election. At a national level and at a provincial level, if a political party or an independent candidate, if an independent candidate gets 250,000 votes, for example, and you only need 50,000 votes to occupy a seat in the national legislature or the National Assembly or the provincial legislature, what happens to the 200,000 other votes that were given to you as an independent candidate? They get discarded, but in discarding them or wasting those votes, the seat allocation that would have gone with those votes is then distributed to political parties. And the majority party, or the party that gets the majority vote, will likely get the majority of those seats. So in essence, you could be voting for an independent candidate, but your vote could actually be going to a political party. Independent candidates need to, at a national level, get almost double the number of votes compared to political parties. So an independent candidate may need, for example, close onto 98,000 votes to get a seat, whereas a political party to get one seat will almost get half of that, needs to only get half of that. And here there's what Veli Musa is saying is the fundamental aspect of our democracy, that one vote by one person needs to be of equal value to the vote of another person. And in this instance, it's simply not happening. But this brings us to the fundamental point of why this is all important. And some of the other speakers alluded to it, that the purpose of electoral reform shouldn't just be about, okay, the court ruled independent candidates, so let's put independent candidates into the system. It should be about ensuring accountability so that you, as an ordinary citizen, can call on your public representative in Parliament and say, why are you voting like this? And I want to use the example of the Nkandla saga. You all remember the fire pool and everything that went with it. Most parliamentarians voted that our former President Zuma didn't need to pay for those fire pool upgrades at his house. And they did that because that was the party line. That was the position taken by the majority party. Very few said that our conscience doesn't allow us to vote for this particular thing, and we won't be able to face the public and explain why we've done so. And the same applies for every other bill that comes before Parliament or every other matter that it discusses. You are unable to hold that representative accountable. One of the other things is that the current system, Veli Musa in his talk again a few days ago said, it's like a square system and you're trying to take a round peg and put it into the system. It's just not going to fit. And the reason for that is that our current system is a proportional system. And what we're trying to do is take what should be a constituency system or half a constituency system and put it into this originally built system, and it's simply not going to fit. And irrespective of what formula is used to calculate how many seats goes to parties and how many seats go to independent candidates, it's never going to give you a proportional and a fair result at the end of the day. So, what is civil society proposing? The first thing that we're saying is that parliamentarians tomorrow, when they're voting, must reject this bill. It's a flawed bill. It's going to be most likely be legally challenged by civil society. If this bill gets passed, it puts into question the credibility and the fairness of the 2024 elections because it disadvantages some candidates over others. Secondly, if it gets passed through and then it's legally challenged, and it most likely will be, then the IEC has very little time to put in place whatever measures it needs to do to ensure that the 2024 elections can run on time. So we may well have a situation where the 2024 elections may be delayed. And when that happens, you can understand how that impacts democracy itself. The third thing that organizations are calling for is a fairer system. And in this report that was pulled together by Veli Musa, what he's proposing is this two-ballot system at a national and provincial level. So 200 seats in Parliament are given to political parties. It's a PR list. 200 seats are given to independent candidates representing political parties like local government elections. And those 200 seats come up from wards that are broken up in different parts of the country. So originally, for example, in Lens, you would have Ward 9. The ward would be extended to the greater south of Johannesburg, and that's your constituency. And why the system is fairer is because, for example, if someone from this community wants to stand for provincial or national government elections, in the current bill, you have to contest with a political party and stand in the whole province as a ward. Now, who will know you in Alexandra Township, for example, if your activism is based in Lenasia? But if the wards are smaller, you are able to do that more effectively. So, I'll round up shortly, but that's our first call to parliamentarians. Thereafter, this process will go to the National Council of Provinces. Again, Parliament has tried to hit a duck and change the tagging of this bill so that the Council of Provinces doesn't have to consult the public effectively. But there will be some sort of process, and we think that there can be the pressure put in that regard. Lastly, we're going to call, you'll see a poster there that says, Mr. President, don't sign the bill. And that's what we're asking everyone here to rally behind, calling on parliamentarians and the President to reject this bill. What can you do about it? I think in the next day, it's really about tweeting your politicians, emailing your parliamentarians, in the coming weeks calling your constituency office and asking them to explain why would they have voted for this bill or against it. Lastly, what happens in the event that this bill gets passed? Is there a middle route that's being proposed? And some organizations are suggesting that the current bill, even though it's flawed, can be changed. It can be made constitutionally compliant so that the 2024 elections is not negatively impacted. But then civil society is compelled, leading to 2029, to ensure that political parties don't push this issue under the carpet once again, as they have always been doing, and that we do get meaningful electoral reform. Thanks.
Shukran. Very enlightening. We will now go to the floor for questions, comments, thoughts. I think in order to just make it a bit more practical, rather than taking different hands and we may miss someone and the person with the mic is to move from one side to the other. If you are not in any way challenged, if we can maybe just queue up behind the light rather. Whoever wants to ask a question or make a comment, and then we'll take you in that sequence. If you could, keep it, just mention who your question is to, or to whose address your comment is related, so that they can take note. We'll ask all the panelists to take note so that they can respond, very specifically, and try and keep your points as brief as possible so that we cover as much as we possibly can. I want to try and wrap up by 10 at the latest, so that people can get back and not have issues with security gates and all of that. So if we could just stand here behind this light in the center between the two sets of chairs, and we'll have the roving mic coming there so that we can take your questions or your comments. I hope the rain hasn't put you in a bit of a sleepy mood. Is there anybody with questions? Okay, Councillor. Just if we can just queue up there, right behind Councillor, and the mic will then be passed on. I'll take a bunch of questions or comments first before we go to the panel. Let's just try and keep it brief, as I said. Bismillah.
Shukran. Thank you so much. It was a very insightful session, I must say. The panelists were excellent in terms of bringing awareness, and I'm hoping from my side, this is more of comments. In terms of, I must commend each one of you. You've done an excellent presentation in terms of bringing awareness and notification to Lenasia and making them understand the political dynamics, because I think the political dynamics is not very well understood in Lenasia, and this then opens up much thought. But at the same time, what I would like the panelists to also consider, and I must thank Radio Islam also for bringing up this kind of events where people can learn from, is that we should look for solutions, and you have the solutions because you are all politicians. You have the solutions. It was wonderfully presented, I must say, but those solutions need to be implemented. And how do we implement it? It starts from yourselves before it comes to the community. So what I'm saying is, I like the civil society. But civil society, at the same time, must also put the pressure with the politicians and with community to get what we want to achieve. So this takes a parallel approach by all of us. And in terms of politicians, yes, I totally agree with Sean when he spells out that when you choose a politician, I think it's all about service delivery. At the end of the day on the ground, it's about exactly what he spelled out in terms of whether it's city power, whether it's your water, whether it's roads. But the reality of the situation, that is what our community needs. I mean, we're sitting with the load shedding. We do have corruption. We know there's looting. But it also takes all of us to stand together in unity. And I think one of the main aspects that we lack in society is the unity. And the unity and the consciousness of understanding that you also have, if you don't have moral fiber, and if you don't comply with integrity and good values, there's no way you're going to get guidance to move forward.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Shukran, shukran. Okay, if you can introduce yourself and then just mention if it's a comment or a question to a specific panelist. Huh?
Thank you. My name is Rashid. A very insightful talk from each of you. I have I'm very interested in the politics. I know it's been given a dirty name and that, but I think that we should be more involved. So in addition to your statistics, Ibrahim, regarding the voter turnout, in 2021, only 35% of the population voted. So only 5 million voted for the ANC, which is only 13%. So I'm saying that the ANC lacks the legitimacy to govern this country. Is there no law that prevents, there's got to be a certain threshold for someone to rule. And then you're talking about accountability. So when the ANC has mismanaged the country to this effect, I've been trying to inquire in what way can we hold them responsible. And I spoke to senior counsel and various legal profession to see what can we do. But unfortunately, the result is that you have to go to an election and you have to vote for the right party. But while they're in power and they mismanage, there's nothing you can do about it. Regarding this electoral reform, how do we, I think as a citizen, when we say civil society needs to do something, there has to be a certain platform. Now, with so few people voting, how do you get everybody to come on? Like if you think about the 2024 election, how do we increase the number of people to come in and vote? So these are just some of the things that is a sense of hopelessness that the democracy is failing. And then this Defend Our Democracy campaign that you guys have so many organizations, what legal standing do you have to challenge this? So these are just some of the questions that is open to all of you if you can answer.
Shukran, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, good evening. My name is Jerry Waja. Shan, I've been sharing that view you shared out with us for some time now. It's not about ideology, it's what the people need and what can be given to the people. So whether you're left or leftist or right, it doesn't matter. My question to Zakia. Zakia, how difficult is it to go to constituency-based elections? The options you gave us is only 2. It means that constituency-based elections is not an option at all. That's all.
Okay. Do we have any other questions from the floor? Any other comments?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mbongeni Meva. I'm from the Region G Parliament. I like what I've heard here today. I've learned a lot. My question right now to the panel is that as much as they have said, talked about a lot about the collusion that we have in the government, I don't think it's fair for the citizens, because today the citizen will vote for the mayor they want to be represented by. But at the end of the day, it's the councillors who decide who they want to stand as a mayor. So I think it's not fair for the citizens. As much as we are standing here today, we are learning a lot from the panel. I would like the same information to reach actually the whole society, not just the people who came here today. I would like this message that we have learned to be spread across all nations actually that are the voters of this country. And I would like the panel, like my brother said, the previous speaker, who said the implementation of it is very important. And it should not only be implemented in places where we think everybody can hear it, but we need to go to the places where we think it's likely for people to capture or get what we are trying to tell them, like the location, the rural areas, which is where the voters of the ANC that has been depleting this country comes from a lot. So those people still depend on the services that the ANC is not delivering, but the promises that the ANC is promising them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Just on your point about spreading the message, it is live on Radio Islam currently. East Wave is going to broadcast it tomorrow. It will be shared on various social media platforms as well. So the message will go way beyond the audience that's present here this evening. Any other questions from the floor, comments, suggestions? Alauddin Osmani, anybody else? I want to take all the questions and comments and then go to the panel so that they can answer fully.
Assalamu alaikum, good evening. Alauddin Osmani. Just very simply, it was very simple to do the delivery. I must have taken a great effort to research the kind of delivery that you made here today for all of you. However, when I say simple, is that to say, for example, choose wisely, Ibrahim. Choose wisely, you can see the statistics are staring you in the face. Determine the kind of people who would have the right kind of ethics in place. I'm saying to you at another level, how easy does it become for the ordinary citizen out there, the vast majority of people, and that's also not counting the people that have a 30% matric pass rate, thanks to the Minister of Education. But given that scenario, every political party is going to come out with a memorandum or something before the election and say, we stand for this, we promise that. And that's been going on for as long as you can say. But given that scenario, how does the ordinary person out there and the vast majority do that determination and know, for example, that this is honesty at its best and this is where I can put my cross? Thank you.
Yusuf Musaji from Radio Islam, and my question is for Shan. You spoke about the fact that, we become lazy, we cast our vote and we disappear, and, the next election we appear, where we cast our vote and we expect things to happen. And that's on the one hand. On the other hand, you gave the example of, a street not working the lights and finding who's a representative and actually tracking down that person. But doesn't it become then too tedious that we've got to then now go to the extent of macro-managing or micro-managing people who are supposed to be doing their jobs, and then it becomes such a tedious process that so many people have to bear the burden of just trying to keep people accountable. Is that really sustainable? Is that an indication that there aren't any politicians across all the political parties that can really just do their job and get the work done?
Anybody else? Going, gone. Okay. Perhaps I'll just add one for all the panelists to consider and factor into their comments, that after all of what you shared with us this evening, what's your suggestion in terms of the most viable option come the 2024 election and in the short to medium term? I know that generally panelists don't want to be too definitive in this regard, but I think there's a kind of thirst for that and no one's going to hold you to it. It's an opinion. But what would you suggest to voters, to communities, as the best option, all things considered, going forward, especially in terms of the next election? But anyway, we'll take the responses starting from Ibrahim on the left. We'll send the roving mic and continue then downwards towards Zakira.
On the left, ideologically speaking, or on the left, physically speaking?
Sham said it's all about service delivery.
Okay, there are many questions. The naughtiest question, which has come from Mr. Osmani, who taught me a lot of what I currently know as my former cricket coach. And in some ways, that's the most difficult question to answer, because largely you have to leave the discretion of how people want to vote on the basis of their own conscience, I think it's become almost impossible to suggest to people or to guide people on how to vote. And Maulana, that might answer a little bit of your question. And the reason I say so is twofold. First, is there are two theories about why people vote or why people choose the political affiliations that they do. The first, in South Africa, suggests that people vote on the basis of their identity. So if you see yourself identified in a particular party, you'll vote for them. If you don't, you'll seek an alternative. Now, I can't understand why that theory has so much relevance. If you take, for example, someone like Jeremy Cronin, and you put Jeremy Cronin in the middle of a township, and you had a constituency election, the likelihood is that people would vote for Jeremy Cronin even though he was white. And the same is true for someone like perhaps Ismail Vadi, who's sitting on my right, not ideologically speaking. So I'm not so sure that this theory of I can see myself identified and therefore I'll vote for them holds true. The second theory, which also doesn't hold true, is that people vote on the basis of what they are given. So you get goodies from a government and you vote for that government. Because if that were the case, people wouldn't be returning the ANC or wouldn't have been returning the ANC in the numbers that they do. So both of those theories, in my view, are actually false. They are not what drive voter behavior and voter determination. On aggregate, people's determination to vote and who they will choose to vote is dependent, as I said, on their trust and confidence levels in public institutions. So you don't have to fully trust that governments will do absolutely everything that they say that they will. But you must more or less trust that they will do so. So in the first decade of South Africa's democratic government, people more or less trusted that the ANC will do what the ANC would do. And by and large, they did. There are complicated reasons why there was economic growth. They are complicated, part of it is a commodities boom. Part of it is the kind of austerity that Thabo Mbeki incepted as policy. I don't want to get into those complications. But more or less, there was a trust that public institutions would do what they are going to do. Over time, that trust declines, and with that trust, there's a correlation between people having trust and people turning out. So that's the one major problem. The second is the society. We like to blame politicians, but we have to take a long, hard look at ourselves as South Africans. How on earth did someone like Hlaudi Motsoeneng end up heading the SABC? How is it possible, if you saw little bits of the Zondo Commission testimony, that there was this woman who was the head of IT, information technology, a woman called Mrs. Kwinana at SARS. She was the head of IT without a computer science degree, but is the head of IT. The former Minister of Home Affairs, I won't mention anything about the video, but his wife appeared on a national television station as a celebrity and spoke about how they helped each other to develop the Home Affairs database. On whose authority? Now, but look at how South Africans responded. We cheered him on. Why? Because Gigaba dressed well. His wife Noma was a celebrity. So it was all fun and games. Look around at our communities. Things like baby rape, things like rape of the elderly, crime, criminal violence, the accommodation of criminals within established political parties. So society has to take a long, hard look at itself. And the first two examples of Kwinana and Motsoeneng, and there's 100 examples of those, People justified it on the basis of, in inverted commas, transformation. And what that did is that it cheapened the idea of transformation, it cheapened the idea of redistribution, it cheapened the idea of social change, because it said social change is all a hollow sham. How is it that these people are in the positions that they are? It's not so much that they were in the positions that they are, it's that they were in the positions that they were and destroyed those institutions. That's the problem. So transformation itself is not the problem. It's what the person did while they were at the institution, and that's the problem. And you look across the entire society, that's the problem. So at some stage, we have to, as a society, take a long, hard look at what our civic morality and what our public ethics are. And I would say they're actually quite low. And South Africans don't like to think about this. Ismail Vadi was talking about taking responsibility or respect for authority. Of course, part of this is manifested in the lack of respect for authority and so on. So two problems. A, consciousness is low. Second, public ethics and civic morality are low, and we have to recover that. How do you do that? Well, partly through civil society and civil action and so on. There are many civil society actors. Not all of us, by the way, are politicians, Mr. Musa. Some of us might be, and we might like to be, but we aren't. But we engage in politics in other ways. People say we haven't held the public authorities to account. On the contrary, we have. There have been hundreds of court cases, and I'm not going to repeat them all. But Section 27, equal education, the Council for the Advancement of South Africa's Constitution, Defend Our Democracy, the Katrada Foundation, a whole range of foundations have been amicus curiae in court cases or have taken the government to court for not doing the things that that government has said it will do. So if you want to, you have to support those kind of initiatives. And more you find that South African corporate sector, the wealthy, are not interested in supporting this kind of activity which actually holds those people in power to account. And there are several reasons why. One is that there's a comfortable accommodation between the corporate elite and the political elite. On the last question, let me pass it on. If there's time, I'll come back on the last question.
Okay.
Thanks, Ibrahim. Just a few comments about is civil society powerless? Because the question is, so many things have gone wrong and nothing seems to be able to correct that. I think that we have demonstrated in South Africa tremendous capability, civil society organizations, and also individuals. Okay? Now we have two types of individuals in society. The active citizen who is prepared to do something about an issue and is prepared to lobby and become part of some sort of movement to oppose or to correct something, and the complacent or don't care attitude of other citizens. So let me give you a few examples of active citizenry. When the whole issue of corruption emerged on a large scale, people even within the ANC couldn't confront the reality of it. But it took one letter of Ahmed Katrada, where he challenged former President Zuma directly as an individual, as a figure within the ANC of Indian origin. Overnight, that within a matter of a few days, that letter had over 500,000 hits on Facebook and retweets and everything else. Suddenly, the culture of fear or inertia, even within the ANC, suddenly broke down. And his funeral became the tipping point where people said, but what is wrong, let's admit it. Now, it took that courage, right, for someone from within the ranks to stand up and say, but this is wrong. And the whole climate after that the mobilization that started taking place across a range of other non-political organizations, ultimately came to the point where the former president was forced to step down on the urgings of his party, but through public pressure. Left to the ANC, it wouldn't have happened. It's the force, the weight of public opinion that came to a point where, it was in January or something, almost at midnight, the former president said, "I'm standing down." That's civil society's power and pressure. Right? And I must never underestimate that. And this that Zakira is talking about for 25 years, I was in parliament for 17 of those 25 years. We never thought it's important to talk about independent candidates. It was like just forgotten. We had the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission of Inquiry into this matter, a whole number of commissions, but the party just didn't think it important. It took the New Nation movement. I never heard of it before, actually, you know that. They took up a case for this woman, Chantal Revel. And they went to the Constitutional Court and said, Chantal wants to stand up as a candidate in this country. The Constitution said every person has a right to be an elected representative, but she doesn't want to go through an established political party. So in 2020, through the action of an organization, New Nation movement that most of us have not heard of, and one person's case, the Constitutional Court gave a historic ruling which told Parliament, within 2 years, fix up, amend the electoral law, the voting law in this country. That's what Parliament is doing now. That's the power of civil society, because somebody bothered to take up the challenge. Look at our judiciary. You know, the former president has tried every legal trick in the book to stay out of jail or out of courts. But the fact that he went to jail, even if it was for 1 day, I don't care about the parole. You know what? There are not many presidents in the world that go to jail, even in the mature democracies. They've gone to jail. The former president of this country has gone to jail. And today his case has been again postponed to January next year, but he is being charged and he has to appear in court. It is not going to disappear. So these are strengths of our democracy. And we mustn't undervalue what civil society and public opinion is about. We are shooting ourselves in the foot and demobilizing ourselves, saying, what can I do? But voices, when you aggregate voices in society through different formations, they have tremendous impact. The last point I want to make, let's not place our hope only in independent candidates. You know, the gangs in the Western Cape can marshal over 1 million supporters. If they all put up independent candidates, we might well have a government of criminals in the Western Cape. Independent candidates. And they have the financial resources. So there's an absolute need for political parties. Let's be clear about it. If you don't have established political parties who become the majority, you can't form a government. How can 400 individuals standing in various constituencies come together? Who will become the president? Who will govern? Who will be the governing party? So there's a need for political parties. The problem is that political parties have conducted themselves in a way that they have lost the trust of the people. And it is only civil society that can force them, that can punish them at the polls, to force them to re-earn the trust of the public.
Shukran. Thank you, Ismail.
I'm so happy that Councillor Musa says civil society must put pressure on politicians. We're going to do that. And we're not going to be asking for permission to get access to council officials, to council information, or to convene meetings without approval of any council or any politician here. Because we don't have to do that. Legal action against government. Makanda, Grahamstown. Community took They got rid of the council. They went to court, they said, this council is not delivering. I think Costa was the same. And the courts then said, go and run it. It is happening in a number of other small towns. Communities are not just asking to meet with officials. They're actually taking over municipalities and services. In other cases, they're setting up alternatives. They're setting up their own trusts. Through those trusts, they provide the services. So people don't pay the council, but they pay it into a trust, and that trust then delivers services and new models of democracy. I think the one thing that we've become stale about is that our thinking and models of democracy are almost the same as that of the previous apartheid government. Very little has changed. Although we had street committees, we had area committees, we had all of these vibrant structures, there was a time in Lens here where every street, where every extension had a residents' association. Almost every street had representatives in a number of them. And you really had power. Osmani and others will know what it took to organize the 1985 bus boycott here. Every bus, commuters were organized, and every bloody week we met at the Katrada Hall to deliberate on these things. There was politics in Lens, and that's why I like the point that you make. We have not been discussing politics in this community, which is why I'm happy that there is this initiative called Lens Politics. It does require political deliberation. When a country collapses, as ours is now, I don't think we have the option but to say that we need to expect more from people. Because what are the other options? But I'm not saying take the job. So if somebody is responsible for fixing the lights, yes, if we can, we must fix the lights. But we must put pressure that the person whose job it is to fix the lights is fired if he or she doesn't do his job. But in order to do that, you know who is actually getting the salary for that job. Now that requires a whole lot of systematic work. There's no advice office in Lens. There's no civic office here. There's no research organization that does that kind of work. And this community is not poor. So I don't know why it doesn't have that resources. When we didn't have the money, we ran an advice center in Lens. There were 2 advice centers here. But we ran them with very little money. But we don't think it's necessary, because we've all retreated into our little extensions. We close them up at night, and we think that that's going to save us from the problems. It will give you safety, it will give you security, but it's not going to make you immune from the collapse that is coming all around that we're facing. So there is a burden of accountability. Accountability work is hard. It is burdensome. If we don't do it, then we must accept whatever comes. Then we must accept the chaos that is coming here. 2024. All I'm saying to you, examine your choices. Ask hard questions. Don't make parties come here and think that they just can give you useless answers for complicated questions. Probe them. Make them work hard for your vote. Make them work for this. Make them feel that they must deserve it when you cast it for them. Interrogate not only the manifesto, but the record of those parties and individuals. Look out for the crooks, and that's the first sign. If a party has crooks on its list, even if they're 3 out of 100, it says to you something is wrong here. And that's the key marker that you must begin to use.
So I want to pick up on the issue of accountability and how a change in electoral systems allows for this. So if you have candidates from the ward or the constituency in which you are based, whether it's from a political party, you know the person's face, you know who they are, or if it's an independent candidate. It makes it much easier to phone that person and ask them, we know you, you're from our community, or you live in the south of Johannesburg, why is this happening in Parliament? Come and account to the community. But at this point in time, very few of us here would be able to know who are the parliamentarians that are meant to be coming into this community to report back on issues. Secondly is that we don't necessarily have very good systems of accountability. And the option that's being proposed by Veli Musa allows for greater models of accountability. So what that system proposes is considering every 2.5 years where residents can call or citizens can call for a by-election. So if the candidate that you voted for in Parliament, whether from a political party or an independent candidate, is not performing, there's some mechanism where you can call for a by-election and vote them out of power. And that works in a kind of ideal setting, but it gives us the option to explore that, whereas the option that's been put on the table by Parliament at the moment closes all of those doors. In terms of the issue of how difficult it is to have a constituency-based system, one of the clauses of our Constitution is that our elections need to result in a proportional result. So that means, for example, we can't have a situation like in America where a minimum amount of voters then get their president, Trump, elected into power because of the way the electoral system is set up. And you have someone like Hillary Clinton, for example, who had more votes than Trump, but didn't end up getting the presidency. So it's a very odd and weird system. Our system has to be proportional, where the majority of votes results in who is then represented on different seats. And that's why the option that's been proposed at the moment with half proportional system and a half constituency system, which is first past the post, allows for greater proportionality. And it allows you to ensure that those who have the majority votes get more seats, and similarly for all of the other parties as the number of votes are counted and collectively that quota is then worked out. The issue of grassroots mobilization and taking these issues into different communities across the country, it's something that we want to do, but we also, this bill gets passed most likely before December. And civil society organizations in different parts of the country are going into communities, into different settings and trying to explain what this bill is about, but we're also racing against time at the moment. But after this bill will most likely be passed, I think leading into 2024 and 2029, it gives us a better chance to reach out to communities. Before the end of the year, together with other civil society organizations, we will most likely be hosting public rallies in different parts of the country, potentially some sort of activation outside the union buildings, and we call on you to support that. It will be on all of our social media pages, the Katrada Foundation, Defend Our Democracy, and others involved in this work. Just on the issue of why civic voices matter, recently you may have heard about the issue of the ministerial handbook, where ministers were going to get perks while everyone here may face electricity tariff hikes, no electricity, no water. Ministers were going to be getting this for free. And you saw public opinion, the immediate anger that came out, and suddenly the president now says, no, this must be reviewed, it can't go ahead. And again, there was a comment by the minister's spokesperson in the weekend paper saying that we are a government that listens. And we are really hoping that the president will listen to us on this issue of electoral reform as well.
Okay. I did say we'll try and conclude by 10. I think it's just gone 4 minutes past 10. So we'll leave it at this juncture. There's much more that needs to be said. Those who have time can perhaps engage a little bit with the panelists after we conclude here. But I would to take this opportunity on behalf of Lands Politics, Defend Our Democracy, Radio Islam, the Jamiatul Ulama office here in Lenasia, Nurul Islam, as well as Eastwave Radio, to thank our panelists, Ibrahim Fakir, Ismail Vadi, Nishan Bolton, and Zakira Vadi, for availing themselves, for preparing the content and for delivering it in such a enlightening way. We really appreciate that. Also to you, the audience here this evening. I know load shedding, on top of it rain, but you took out the time and you made the effort and you've joined us here this evening and you've made good input. And to all those listening and who will be listening in the coming days to whatever has been shared here this evening, I'll conclude on that point which I started off on, and that is that as frustrated and as disillusioned and as angry that we may be, we can't give up. We've got to engage, we've got to understand, we've got to probe, we've got to explore for the betterment of our country and for the improvement of all of our interests, inshallah, God willing. Thank you so much, and assalamu alaikum, good evening.